The United States entered World War II after Japan attacked its naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii on December 7, 1941. Within hours, it declared war on Japan, and days later, both Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S. After years of isolationism, minding our own business, and efforts to affect the outcome of the war without participating, our country had no other option. As we know from the First World War, a country cannot successfully participate in war efforts without support from within its own borders. In today's lesson, we are going to explore how the government and industry reacted to the United States' entry into the war, as well as how different groups of Americans contributed to war efforts. Lastly, we will learn how these efforts helped the U.S. out of the Great Depression. As you are listening and taking notes, you should be focusing on the following essential question. What measures did the United States take on the home front once it became involved in World War II? During World War II, the Allied nations included the United States, Great Britain, Canada, and the Soviet Union. These countries fought to either protect democracy or prevent the spread of fascism. The Big Three referred to the leaders of the major Allied powers: Winston Churchill from the United Kingdom, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and then Harry S. Truman from the United States, and Joseph Stalin from the Soviet Union. They played crucial roles in making important decisions that helped shape the outcome of the war. Going back to before U.S. entry into the war, in the early years, the U.S. followed a strict policy of isolationism, aiming to avoid getting directly involved in the conflict. This policy was influenced by the devastation of World War I and our desire to focus on domestic issues. The United States passed laws like the Neutrality Acts to prevent trade with warring nations and maintain neutrality. However, as the war escalated and threats to democracy grew, the United States eventually shifted towards a more active role in the conflict, leading to its entry into World War II in 1941 after the bombing of Pearl Harbor by Japan. The Lend-Lease Act was one of President Roosevelt's programs enacted by the United States in 1941 to provide military aid to foreign countries, particularly the Allies. This act allowed the United States to lend or lease weapons, supplies, and other materials to countries fighting against the Axis powers, such as Great Britain and the Soviet Union, before officially entering the war themselves. This support played a crucial role in helping these nations defend themselves and ultimately contributed to the Allied victory in the war. Looking at things after the fact, the United States didn't enter the war as suddenly as it may have seemed at the time. There was a gradual shift in policy. In the wake of World War I, the United States took on isolationist policies supported by the vast majority of Americans. Then, as Europe entered World War II, while many still wanted the United States to focus on itself, they also sympathized with countries like Great Britain and France and supported sending aid. As a result, the Lend-Lease Act and other policies were put in place to aid the Allies while maintaining technical neutrality. Then, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, Americans wanted justice for the lives lost and a show of force that told other countries we could not be underestimated. As a result, the United States entered the war at the end of 1941. Prior to entry and before Japan attacked, the opposition to entering the war was great. The America First Committee, founded in 1940, opposed aid to the Allies because of fear that we would become involved in the war. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, this committee was dissolved and it shifted to support war efforts. However, Jeannette Rankin was a U.S. Congresswoman from Montana who famously opposed our entrance into the war. She was the only representative to vote against declaring war after the attack on Pearl Harbor. As we know, during the Great Depression, the U.S. faced economic struggles with high unemployment rates and low production. However, the shift to wartime production during the war played a crucial role in pulling the country out of the economic downturn. Factories that were once inactive due to the Depression began producing military equipment, supplies, and uniforms for the war effort. This increase in production created new job opportunities, reducing unemployment significantly. The demand for goods and services related to the war boosted the economy, leading to an overall recovery from the Great Depression. Even though the United States was finally recovering from the Great Depression and many people were back at work, there was still a need to ensure that our soldiers had what they needed overseas. Americans supported these war efforts in various ways, including rationing and purchasing war bonds. Rationing involved limiting the amount of certain goods individuals could buy to ensure enough supplies for the military. This helped conserve resources like food, gas, and materials needed for the war. Additionally, Americans purchased war bonds or victory bonds to help finance the war. These bonds were like loans to the government that citizens could buy, knowing they would be repaid with interest after the war. These actions not only provided essential support for the war, but also united the American people in a collective effort to contribute to the country's victory. These weren't the only ways that Americans supported. There are multiple groups that we will look at that supported the war efforts in their own way. First, women, who made up nearly half the population, were an absolute necessity for American success in the war. Many women took on jobs traditionally held by men, such as factory work, farming, and munitions production, to help meet the demands of the war. These women became known as Rosie the Riveters and were instrumental in producing essential supplies for the troops. Additionally, women served as nurses, clerks, and drivers, providing vital support to soldiers both at home and overseas. Their contributions not only helped to win the war, but also paved the way for greater gender equality and opportunities in the workforce. Beyond the workforce, women were the largest supporters and drivers behind bond and recycling drives, which supported our government's efforts. A second group that's important to note, African Americans. They played an important role in supporting the war efforts. Despite facing segregation and discrimination at home, many African Americans served in the military with bravery and dedication. The Tuskegee Airmen, for example, were a group of African American pilots who fought in the skies over Europe and North Africa. Additionally, African Americans worked in various industries to produce essential war materials, such as weapons, ammunition, and vehicles. Charles Drew was a doctor and medical researcher before the war, and he helped to develop large-scale blood banks to help improve survival outcomes for our soldiers. By the time the 332nd flew its last combat mission on April 26, 1945, 2 weeks before the German surrender, the Tuskegee Airmen had flown more than 15,000 individual sorties over 2 years in combat. They had destroyed or damaged 36 German planes in the air and 237 on the ground, as well as nearly 1,000 rail cars and transport vehicles and a German destroyer. In all, 66 Tuskegee-trained aviators were killed in action during World War II, while another 32 were captured as prisoners of war after being shot down. A third group that played a vital role in the success of the United States war efforts were Native Americans. Native American soldiers played a crucial role as code talkers. These brave individuals used their native languages such as Navajo, Comanche, and Choctaw to create unbreakable codes that the enemy could not decipher. By transmitting important messages in their native tongues, Native American code talkers helped secure communication lines and prevent vital information from falling into the hands of the enemy, ultimately contributing to the Allied victory. The Navajo Code, in particular, was so effective that it remained classified long after the war ended. Unfortunately, not all Americans saw increased equality and opportunity. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States government and many citizens became distrustful of anyone with Japanese heritage, even if they were American-born citizens and had no ties to Japan. This led to tremendous discrimination and racism. The United States government implemented policies that led to the incarceration of Japanese Americans in internment camps. Despite many Japanese Americans being born in the U.S. and being loyal citizens, they faced this discrimination and were forced to leave their homes to live in these camps. The internment camps were often overcrowded and lacked proper facilities, causing great hardship for the Japanese American community. This unjust treatment of Japanese Americans during World War II is now recognized as a dark chapter in American history, highlighting the importance of protecting the rights and freedoms of all individuals in times of conflict. So take a moment to reflect on our essential question today. What measures did the United States take on the home front once it became involved in World War II? How did groups like women, African Americans, and Native Americans specifically help the American efforts? How were Japanese Americans affected by our entrance into the war?